So today we're going to be basically putting everything together, finding all the information and then graphing it, and then using critical thinking to figure out what my graph looks like. Okay? So in our first practice problem, we're going to first find all of our information. Okay? So here we go. Again, we're going to follow that T, B, B, 0, okay, to find all of my information. So first we're going to do the top. Remember, the top gives me my X-intercepts. So this is the top, okay? So my X-intercepts are going to be at 4 and -2, okay? Because they're the zeros, the solutions of my numerator, okay? Then bottom. The bottom gives me my vertical asymptotes. So the solutions of the bottom, you set this equal to 0. This is x equals 0, and this one here is x equals -5. Okay, so those are my vertical asymptotes. Now, my horizontal, that's my both part. Okay, so I compare the power of the top and the power of the bottom. The power of the top, that's going to be x squared, and the power of the bottom is -x squared. And then we look at the coefficients. Coefficient on top is 1, the coefficient on the bottom is -1, so that means that my horizontal asymptote is at y equals -1, because 1 divided by -1. And then finding my y-intercept, that's the 0 part. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to plug in 0. But we already know if we plug in 0, that's a 0 of my denominator, and I have a vertical asymptote at x equals 0, which means we don't have a y-intercept. If you plug in 0, so if you actually plugged in f of 0, you would have gotten -4 times +2 over 0 times 5, which would have been -8 over 0, and we're not allowed to divide it by 0. That makes this undefined. The reason that it's undefined, or dividing by 0, is because that's where we have our vertical asymptote. Okay? So now we draw our information. Again, like I told you before, I use certain colors, so my vertical asymptotes are yellow. So I have one here at 0 and at -5. Then I draw my horizontal asymptote, which is at -1. I use green, like that. Then I use blue for my x and y intercepts. Since I don't have any y intercepts, just my x intercepts. So I have one at -2 and +4. Okay. Now I have all of my information. Next step is actually graphing using this information. And again, this is the part where this is our critical thinking, our like actual trying to decipher what's going on. Okay. Now, I have 3 pieces to graph. I know I have 3 pieces to graph because I have 2 vertical asymptotes. I have one here, one in between here and here, and one on this side. Okay. I generally start with the left and the right first because they tend to be the easiest. Okay. Now, I have 2 options. On this left side, it's either going to be up here where it comes down and follows out my horizontal asymptote, or it comes up this vertical one and follows my horizontal. And again, we've been talking about what's not there is just as important as what is there. Okay? So could it be above the horizontal? Well, if it was above the horizontal, it would come down here and it would have to cross the x-axis to follow my horizontal asymptote. But there's no x-intercept there, so it can't cross the x-axis. So my only choice for this part is like this. Now, conversely, on the other side, on the right side, I do have an x-intercept there, and I know that it crosses the x-axis there because the power is odd, and odd roots cross the x-axis. So it has to do this. Come down, cross, and then follow my asymptote. Because a function will always follow its asymptote. And if we know it crosses here, if we look at the other side, if it had come up here and then crossed, it would have to cross the x-axis again here to get back to that horizontal asymptote. And is there another x-intercept there? No. So it can't do that because there's no other second one, okay? So this is what I mean about this thinking. You got to think about it, okay? Now, the middle piece. I have an x-intercept, so I know it crosses. So it either crosses like this or it crosses like this. The only way to find out is to do what? Plug in a number. And what number are we going to plug in? Any number in between here, but the easiest one is -1. So x equals -1. So when I plug it in, now I'm just looking to see if it's on the positive side or if it's on the negative side to let me know. So when I plug in -1 into my first factor, I get negative. When I plug it into my second one, I get positive. On the bottom, negative makes it a positive, and then a positive. So at -1, we're on the negative side. And I'm just going to write it there, -1, -1, just so that I have 2 points. Now, since I have 2 points, I can connect them. And again, like I said, it has to cross. So this one goes up like that. On this side, it goes down here like that. And that's my rational function. Okay. Now, here's the other thing, is that be careful. On this left side, we could have plugged in a point, okay? But what we have to realize is that unless we plugged in a point really, really close to the asymptote, most of the points are going to be negative on this side anyway. So even if it did come down, you wouldn't really be able to tell anyway. So that side you have to really, really think about. Okay? All right, so let's look at our second problem. Okay? Now, again, we got this rational function. It's in factored form, so I really don't have to worry about factoring or anything like that. So let's just find our information first. Again, top, bottom, both 0. Remember, top is our x-intercepts. We have one x-intercept because we only have one factor. So my x-intercept is at 0, 0. Okay. And we talked about this before. Since my x-intercept's 0, 0, my y-intercept is automatically 0, 0. So we knocked out 2 birds with 1 stone there. Then we look at the bottom. The bottom gives me my vertical asymptotes. So again, the solutions, x equals -3, x equals 5, and x equals -8. Those are my 3 vertical asymptotes. My horizontal asymptote is given by both the power of the top and the power of the bottom. Well, the power of the top is -8x squared. That one's easy. The bottom is going to be x times x times x, which is x cubed. And since the bottom is bigger, going back to that chart, since the bottom is bigger, my horizontal asymptote is automatically at y equals 0. Okay? So there's my information that I'm going to be graphing. So start with my vertical asymptotes. So we have one at -8, -3, and +5. We have our horizontal at 0. And this time we only have one X or Y intercept, which is going to mean that we've got a lot of work to do on this one. Okay. So we have 3 vertical asymptotes, which means we have 4 pieces to draw. Okay. All right. So let's start on the left side. Okay. So on this left side here, we have a horizontal at 0, and we have a vertical here. Our graph is going to follow these asymptotes, so it's either going to be all down here or all up here. I don't have an X-intercept. It's not going to cross. I don't really have to worry about anything like that. But what I am going to have to worry about is the fact that I'm going to have to plug in a point to see if it's on the negative side or if it's on the positive side. So I'm going to look at x equals -10. And I'm going to do my sign chart. When I plug in -10 into the top, I get a negative. Because negative number squared will be positive, and then multiply it by a negative number, it will be negative. So the top will almost always be negative. Then the bottom. First factor is negative, second factor is negative, third factor is negative. Negative divided by negative is positive. Negative times a negative is positive, which means it nets a positive number. So I'm on the positive side. So my curve is up here. Okay. So let's do the other side, the right side. So I'm going to use +10. Again, top factor is going to be negative, but this time the bottom factor is going to be positive, positive, and positive, because positive plus 3 is positive, 10 minus 5 is still positive, 10 plus 8 is still positive, so all bottom is positive, top is negative, which means on the right side, I'm on the negative side. So it comes up here like this, and it stays below the x-axis, just like that. Now, let's do this part here in the middle. Pick whatever point you want. So x equals -5. Plug -5 in the top. -5 squared is positive. Then a positive times a negative is negative on top. -5 plus 3 is negative. -5 minus 5 is negative. -5 plus 8 is positive. And the negative times the negative is positive, which means at -5, we're on the negative side here. Now, that means that basically I can't cross my x-axis. There's no x-intercept. I can't cross my vertical asymptotes. So the only thing this thing can do is it can follow this asymptote up and then turn back around. Basically, it had to U-turn. There's no bridge to cross the x-axis, so you just got to end up going back the way it came. Okay. Next, we have this other middle piece where we have our x-intercept. Now, that root, that x-intercept, that 0, 0, what is the power on that root? Well, it's a 2. That's even. So based on our multiplicity, what's going to happen at that root? It's going to bounce. So either this is going to come down here and bounce back up, or it's going to come up here and bounce back down. And again, the only way to figure that out is plug in a point. So real easy one is +1. Okay, you could have used -1 or -2, but why you have a negative sign flying around if you don't need it, right? So plug in 1. Plug in 1, 1 squared is 1, times -8, top is still negative. -1 plus 3 is positive. -1 minus 5 is negative. +1 plus 8 is positive, and a negative divided by a negative is positive. So at 1, we're on the positive side, which is telling me that it's up there. So it does the same thing the last one did, except it comes down here, hits the x-axis, and then bounces back up. And that's graphing rational functions.